Good morning, good Chodesh. We are on 43a, and we are the second to last line, 3 words from the end. So the Gemara is now going to address the third anomaly in the verse. The first anomaly was the added word ha'ish, right? We're discussing the verses that describe the Kohen speech telling those who are exempt from battle to go home, to become jobniks, to become kitchen staff or whatnot. And they are the one who has a new home. The one who doesn't has a new home hasn't inaugurated. The one who has a new field hasn't yet redeemed it, hasn't yet been able to use it. And the one who is betrothed hasn't married. So the first anomaly in this Miya'ish, who is a person, who is the man that bought a house. That extra added word man, which isn't required, comes to teach us that even if you bought the home or you inherited the home or you got it as a gift, you still go back home for that if you haven't inaugurated yet. And it's not exclusive to actually building. The next anomaly, which was disputed, is the fact that the verse puts the word build before the word house. It could have said, he who a house built, Miyasher Bayis Bana, but it says, Miyasher Bana Bayis, you built a house, putting the expansive term, built, before the specific term, house, the limiting term. And thus the principle of klal uprat is, the general followed by specific, that the general opening statement is primary, built, and thus built anything. But that general rule is limited to something similar to the specific term house. And thus what you're building must be something that's capable of dwelling in, as opposed to building a balcony, a portico, the other examples there. We had Rabbi ben Yaakov, who rejected this last understanding, rejected the application of the principle klal uprat to these words, and he said, build a house means literally a house. You're only exempt from battle if you built an actual house, not if you built some storage home. He doesn't apply the general rule of klal uprat to expand the definition beyond just the house.
Because it was missing a word.
So my assumption as to what the underpinnings of this dispute is because we have another rule, which is, as a rule, we don't apply rules unless there is a superfluous word in the Torah. But here there is no superfluous word because the statement follows and you can't extract any word. He who built a house, which word are you extracting? And still have the sentence flowing. You can't. You have to say all words, and therefore no reason to apply the rule. The other opinion might say, well, there is no superfluous word, but it could have done in a different order, and therefore that itself warrants the invitation of a principle. That's perhaps the dispute between Rabbi ben Yaakov and the original the Tanna Kama, the first sage. That's my suggestion. Again, I haven't read this anywhere, but this is my suggestion as to what's underpinning their dispute. Okay, the third anomaly, which the Gemara is going to address now, is the stress on and has not inaugurated it, the added word it, which in Hebrew is actually only an added letter. It's an added suffix. That's the Gemara is going to address in a moment. So the last 3 words on the bottom of Mem Gimel Madal, at the bottom of 43a. The verse does not say that one who bought a home and hasn't inaugurated. That would have been 3 letters, ches nun chaf, chinech. Rather, the loy chin choy, it says, and he hasn't inaugurated it, adding the extra vav at the end. He hasn't inaugurated it. So when it says it, it's a limiting term. It's a limiting term. I inaugurated it and not something else. So what's to be excluded from the stress on it? Yeah, following?
Mm-hmm.
You were with me? Says the Gemara, prat legazlan. This comes to exclude one who stole a house. Because even if one stole a house, depending on the circumstance, it's quite possible that you end up owning it. If the owner gave up or whatever, so you'd have to pay back by Torah law and pay back extra. double even. But you still own that actual house under certain circumstances. So if you own that house, so you acquired a new house, just as the Gemara earlier expanded the definition of built because of the extra word ish, the extra word man. We said it's not just someone who builds, it's also someone who buys a house or inherits a house or gets it as a gift. So you might have argued, well, if you get any house in any fashion, even if you got it illegally, but if it belongs to you now legally, you might just have to pay for it later, but you still own it. And maybe that person too is exempt from war to go inaugurate it. And therefore the Torah says inaugurate it. Only certain types you inaugurate, but not any open-ended inauguration. So we have to exclude something from the list. And what we're excluding is one who stole a house. Okay.
Because you can't ignore something that you don't own.
No, because the Torah doesn't give you that privilege. You could inaugurate something you don't own. Well, you do own it. You just acquired it illegally. That's the point. You do own it. Again, if someone stole property,
you acquired something illegally, you own it.
So again, under certain circumstances, at a certain point after you stole something, you own it legally. You own it. You have to pay for it, but you still own it. So you acquired it illegally, but you legally own it. So perhaps you can also be exempt from war to go inaugurate it. Says the Torah, no, you lose that privilege just because you stole it. It's a punishment. The Torah is giving you a privilege not to go to war because you bought a home you haven't inaugurated it yet. We're not going to give you that privilege if you stole the house, even though technically speaking you own it. That's it. Says the Gemara. So Lema, let us suggest. So all the text until now was the Mishnaic age text. Remember we talked about this yesterday, that Rabbi Nasi collected all these notes and made a concise, condensed, edited version, which we have as the Mishnah. And the Gemara will introduce other texts of that same era that haven't been so edited and so concise to give us elaboration. So until this point, we've been reading one such brisa.
Oh, right.
Yeah, brisa, Tosefta. Yeah, so we've just been reading one such brisa, which gives us more background to what the Mishnah said. Right, the Mishnah said this all very concise, but this is more elaboration and how we derive it from the verses and so on. So it says the Gemara then. Now this is the Gemara, the narrator speaking. And now, just to give you, if you want to like cues in how to learn, how do I know that the Gemara is speaking and not the brisa? Because the Gemara switched to Aramaic. A brisa is always going to be Hebrew. A brisa, Mishnaic age text is always going to be in Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Holy Tongue, because it's written in Israel, either right after the Second Temple was destroyed or sometime during the Second Temple period. And the Aramaic language is only introduced when the Jews end up in Babylonia. So as soon as the Gemara switches to Aramaic, I know it's no longer the Mishnaic text. That's Q1. And Q2 is when the Gemara makes some sort of analytic about the text, as opposed to the text itself speaking, you can kind of see from the inflection that we're switching. Because till now the verse has been quoting, the Gemara has been quoting verses to explain its own ruling. That would be Mishnaic sort of exercise. Now what the Gemara is doing is questioning the very text that analyzed the verses. So it must be a text post that text. Thus I know it's Gemara, not Mishnah. Just giving you kind of cues as you learn, you pick up these things as to how to know who's speaking. So Lema, let us suggest, that's an Aramaic word, which means let us suggest, that this text we just read, this brisa we just read, which states that the verse which says that the person goes home because he hasn't inaugurated it comes to teach us that someone who acquired a home via theft does not get this exemption and must stay in the battlefield, doesn't go home. That is the loik Rabbi Aglili, does not follow cannot be Rabbi Aglili, right? So let's imagine us in the Gemara. We are sages in the Gemara, yeah, and we have the Mishnayos in front of us. So we have Rabbi Yehuda's authoritative, concise, edited version of the text. Plus, we have other texts. Now, these other texts are who's talking in these other texts. We have no idea. We just have them. So it's somebody's notes from 100 years ago, 200 years ago, whatever it is, right? So we're going to try to figure out who wrote this thing. So we'll compare it to other texts we have and see, do we find contradictions? Then we know that they belong to two different people. Do we find parallels? Well, maybe it's the same person, right? So we in the Gemara are now analyzing all these texts we have in front of us to see if we can decipher who's talking. That's what we're doing now. So we look at the last text, which gave us this whole background as to how we derive the law of who's exempt. The only author, the only name in this text is Rabbi ben Yaakov, and he's only quoted as a dissenting view, as a view which rejects the expansion of the definition of building a home. Right? We expanded it to mean even if you built a storage house or whatever. And Rabbi ben Yaakov said it only applies to a home itself. But the rest of the text, we have no author. Presumably the person who wrote the notes didn't write his name on the notes because it's his notes. He doesn't need to tell who, he doesn't need to say who's speaking. He only gives us the dissenting name. His own name he doesn't put in. So we in the Mishnah are looking at this text and trying to figure out, we in the Gemara, us Gemara in Babylonia, we're looking at this text and trying to figure out who's talking. Yeah, this is the exercise we're doing now. So the Gemara first suggests, well, it's probably not Rabbi Yosef Glili. How so? To eat Rabbi Yosef Glili, because if you were to suggest that it's Rabbi Yosef Glili, we have a different text in which we know Rabbi Yosef Glili is speaking, and that text seems to imply something different to our text. Following with me? Okay. So what does the other text say? Ha'amar, Rabbi Yosef Glili said in another text, referring to the next verse, which was verse 8 or 9. Right? Remember from yesterday we had 3 speeches. One, the Kohen gives, don't be afraid. The third speech, if you built a house, built a vineyard, got married, go home. And the fourth speech was, if you are weak-hearted, don't bring down your troops, go home. Yeah. So in that fourth speech, he says like this, Veracha Levov, the verse says that the officers tell the people, if you are faint of heart, go home, you're going to bring down your troops. So explains Rabbi Yosef Glili, what is the meaning of someone who's faint of heart? What kind of faint of heart? Because the verse is a little bit redundant. Because the verse says, who is the person who is afraid and faint of heart? Why afraid and faint of heart? What are these 2 different categories? Afraid presumably means literally you're afraid of battle. You don't have the wherewithal to withstand the trauma of battle. Okay. The next one is Rachalevov, soft of heart. What's that extra definition? Right? It's the same thing as afraid, is it not? The verse says both. Hayare varachalevov. You're afraid or weak of heart. Who are these 2 different people? So it says Rabbi Yosef Glili, afraid means you're literally afraid. But rachalevov, weak of heart, means zah misyare. This is one who is afraid of going to battle, not because he's afraid of his own capacity, but top of 43b, maveder shebiyadai. He's afraid of sin he has. So he has past sin, this person. He's not afraid of fighting. He's okay with war. But he's afraid that his lack of merit will bring down everybody. That's what he's afraid of. And he too is going to leave the camp because he's going to bring everybody down with his fear. Following? With me, everybody? Yeah?
In other words, the second one, faint of heart, is not only about himself, but he has a negative influence.
Both of them are about the negative influence on everybody. That's right. But the Kohen announces 2 categories of people who in their weakness bring everybody else down. One, afraid, literally afraid, and B, weak of heart. What's that B, weak of heart? Says Rabbi Yosef Glili, the weak of heart means he's afraid of sin, of his own past sin that he has, that's going to lower the merit of his troops. That's his fear. Not literal fear of battle, but fear of his spiritual standing. That's his fear.
Which has an effect on the others.
On himself and others. Not the sin doesn't affect everybody else. It's the fear that causes everybody else to be weakened.
How is it expressed? And or and?
And. But the word and in Torah, the vav could be or also. Many times the word vav is or. And sometimes it's and/or. So it could be all of them. Even though Torah says oi, the word oi, aleph vav, is usually or, but not uncommon for the vav to be a or as well. Or an and or a slash. Okay, so this is Rabbi Yosef Glili's teaching. Rabbi Yosef Glili teaches that someone who's afraid because of past sin leaves battle. Now, under which category is this person who is afraid of sin leave battle? Under the fourth category, in the third speech, right? In the third speech of the officers, which say if you're going to bring down morale, leave. That includes someone who has sin. Now, if that's the case, the Gemara reasons, then the previous item, the previous exemptions mentioned in the speech do not include someone who has sin. because each item in the speech must give another category of people who are exempt. Right? The first three bought a new house, built a new vineyard, got a new, betrothed to a woman, and then category 4, afraid, 2 types of fear. So these 2 types of fear cannot already be included in the first 3, otherwise it's redundant. So if Rabbi Yosef says that someone who's afraid of sin believes the battle under the last speech, then it cannot be included in the previous speech.
He's afraid of sin.
Sorry?
He's afraid of sin.
Then
Why
he's
does he do it?
which means even a thief goes home. Because he's a thief, he's afraid of sin, he's got to leave home. And we just finished saying that if you stole a house, you don't get that exemption, stay right where you are. And thus, the Gemara assumes our text, which says if you stole, stay right where you are, does not follow Rabbi Lili, because Rabbi Lili would have said, go to the next category. And if you stole, go home, because you're going to bring your people down because of your fear of sin. Colin?
Well, couldn't it be both a thief and one who's fearful of his sins? And then what happens when?
That's the point.
So then,
If a person steals, does he stay in battle or leave battle?
under that condition alone,
If
he
he
stays in battle.
But then the next statement is if you have sin, leave. He has sin. He just stole a house.
So you should.
So then it's
there. It's you have to.
So therefore says the Gemara, these 2 texts must be the 2 different authors. So the text we said till now cannot be Rabbi Lili, because Rabbi Lili would say that thief goes home. The text we just read said the thief stays right where he is. That's right. It's all to establish who's speaking. That's correct. It's okay. The Gemara is okay with a dispute, but let's just clarify the dispute. That's all.
Just rule out the speaker.
And then, which would lead us to conclude there's a dispute here. Right? Clear? So the previous text, which says, our original text, which said, because the Torah says you inaugurate it. The it is an exclusionary term to exclude someone who stole a house, which means if you stole the house, stay right where you are, don't leave. Must be in contrast to Rabbi Lili's view, who says if you have sin, leave. And this guy's definitely got sin. He just stole a house. Sorry?
How can you steal a house?
The Gemara discusses elsewhere you can steal a home. You can literally throw someone else or
Someone's abroad. He left his house.
yeah, if someone leaves and you just walk right in and move in.
He's there for 3 years, right?
There's all kinds of different halachas about that. Of when, at what point does he acquire that house? But there's times when you can steal a house. Okay. Unfortunately, these cases still happen until here in Canada. You can ask the lawyer. I'm sure this comes up. Okay, says the Gemara. Sorry?
Country home.
Yeah. Squatters. So the Gemara now says, sorry?
I'd like to see somebody move into our country. God.
With your track record, I don't know. With your track record, I don't know if they want to go. So now that what the Gemara is going to do now is the Gemara is going to try to reconcile these 2 texts. Now the reason why the Gemara does that is like this: we have a principle, la frushi machlekes hafashinan. We try as best as we can to avoid dispute. So if we can somehow reconcile seemingly opposing views to be in sync, we do, even if sometimes we have to distress the definition. Because unless we have handed down to us that sage A argued with sage B, there's no reason for us to assume so. So at the moment we're assuming there's a dispute. One text, unnamed, says, if you stole the house, don't leave battle. And Rabbi Lili says, if you have sin, which includes stealing, leave. Yeah? Now the Gemara is going to suggest that maybe these 2 texts are not a contradiction, and therefore we're not ruling out Rabbi Lili as a possible author of the original text. And thus we would avoid a potential dispute. How so? Says the Gemara, Filotema, we can even suggest Rabbi Lili that this original text, which says that if you stole the house, leave. If you stole the house, stay right where you are, don't leave. You don't get that exemption. That it even follows the opinion of Rabbi Lili, which says that if you sinned, leave. How so? Kagoyin, for example, the Avad Teshuva, the Yohiv Domi. The person stole the house. And he does Teshuva. He did Teshuva and he paid back. So he did everything he asked him. But he still owns the house. So does he leave battle or not? Well, he has no sin. He's not afraid of that. So comes the original text which said that if you stole the house, you don't get the exemption. This person doesn't get the exemption. Even though now he did Teshuva and he paid for the house, but because originally you stole it, stay right where you are. So had you not done Teshuva, you would leave because you have sin. But because you did Teshuva, so you have no sin anymore, you stay right where you are and don't get the exemption of buying a new house because you got it through theft, even though you have done Teshuva. You still don't get that special privilege of buying a new house and leaving war. Clear? Says the Gemara, but the Gemara presses further to get this, to clarify what I just said. The Gemara says, Yachi, if he did Teshuva and he paid the house, if so, he is a purchaser. And let him leave battle because he bought a house. Says the Gemara, no. It's true he's a purchaser because he cleared his name, he did Teshuva and paid for it. But Kivin Dimikara, the Torah has got Gizela Asla, because originally he acquired it through theft, even though right now it's all clear, he did not get the exemption. In other words, the exemption is not just because you bought a house legally, because by law, this person who stole, did Teshuva and paid, also bought a house by law. But it's a special privilege that Torah is giving you because you're starting a new chapter in life. We didn't want you to start this new chapter in life. You stole a house. So this exemption for someone who's starting a new chapter in life is only in such a case where Torah says, we're happy and proud you're starting a new chapter in life. So even though your name is cleared, you did Teshuva, you paid, and you own the house by law and everything's fine, but we're not going to celebrate this new chapter in life because we didn't want you to do it.
And it's also
Right.
a deterrent.
It's a
Say, I can do Teshuva, and then
Or if you're talking about people looking for exemptions, right? The guy's going to go steal a house and say, I got a new house. I'm like, I want to go home. I want to leave. Sorry, pal, you're staying right where you are. Right? Whereas the other text basically really says, where the person who has sin should leave the battlefield. This is before Teshuva. If he didn't do Teshuva, then he has sin. He should leave.
It speaks to a powerful bureaucracy of the time.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I was having this discussion with a kid yesterday, trying to understand the bureaucracy of how Torah worked, and I recommend this. Open up Rambam, Laws of Sanhedrin, and read the first chapter. And even the second one. Read the first two chapters of Sanhedrin. Laws of Sanhedrin.
There's so many Din Torahs, and they're all reporting.
That's right. So if you read the first two chapters of Rambam's Laws of Sanhedrin, it's very easy to read. They're not very complex laws. You'll get a full structure of what the legal judiciary system looked like, a system of judges and officers, and how they trained young students to eventually become judges, and how you were able to advance in your career to eventually make it to the high court. A whole system of how society was built, and you can see it was very, very rigorous. It was a very rigorous.
There's no hiding there.
Yeah.
In our current
See, these judges, these officers, would have had a record on all the soldiers anyway. Something called Shluchei Bezdin. The Sanhedrin had their emissaries, which would go around from town to town to investigate what's going on, how the Bezdin's doing. Are they doing divorces right? Are they doing marriages right? Are they doing Trumas, Meiser? Who's doing what? Who's doing this? They would keep track of all the stuff. They had a very serious data on the people.
census.
It's part of the census, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu's time, the census. And the census there, you'll remember, is connected to battle. Isha Yetzel Milchama, man who's capable of going out to battle, right? So the census is very much linked to the army, to building legions. So absolutely, very strong bureaucracy or administration that would have overseen all this happening.
When a person steals a house,
Yeah,
and does Teshuva, does he have to do it in front of witnesses?
the Teshuva.
Yeah.
So the Teshuva by halachic standard. Sorry,
You can just say, I did Teshuva.
it's a good question. As a rule, halachic Teshuva is a person makes a decision to never sin again. Now, we don't know what's in your heart. So when you make a decision of never sinning again, or let's say take it on the definition, I'm never going to do that sin again. Right? Alter Rebbe writes in chapter 1 of Law, Iger Teshuva, that it means a person says, I will never sin again, period. But let's just take Rambam's definition, which is a person says, I'm never going to do that sin again. Yeah. So we have no idea what's in your heart. Did you mean it when you said that? We don't know. So the Bezdin will have to either devise some circumstance or observe a circumstance through witnesses or whatnot, in which you had the opportunity to do that same sin and didn't. Another case is, for example, a person, let's say, was an avid gambler, and he throws out his dices. Okay, that's a demonstrative act that his decision was wholehearted. at least in that moment. And similar such things, where someone who had a certain track record of behavior, and we can this is in the laws. It's in the laws of Edus. It's in the Shulchan Aruch. You can open up the Code of Jewish Law. It's in the laws of Edus, the laws of terminating witnesses. It's the same thing. In order for a person to be a witness, he can't be a quote sinner. So he has to do Teshuva. So if he has a history of doing certain behavior, we have to see that he demonstrates his willingness to stop.
An offering involved too, right? It's during the temple.
That would be for kapara. That would be for atonement. That's for atonement. Atonement is separate from Teshuva. Teshuva is something you do in your heart, and atonement is something God gives you in response to your Teshuva. Right? So sometimes you need Yom Kippur for kapara. Sometimes you need a carbon for kapara. Sometimes you need other things for kapara. Right? But kapara and Teshuva are two separate things. Much more on that. I did a year or two last year. I did a series on. We learned through Rambam's laws of Teshuva. 1 year in Elul. So if you look at the first class or two, I explained this whole idea, the difference between Teshuva and Kapara, and difference between Rambam and Alter Rebbe. Right? But essentially, the way we know he did Teshuva is if he demonstrates in some sort of fashion that he stopped doing what he did. That's essentially what it is. Okay, we'll stop over here. And tomorrow, God willing, the Gemara is going to do the same exercise we did today. We did the last 2 days, but this time for the vineyard. We did it for the house, the three anomalies. It says a man, it says action before the specific item. So in the case of the house, it was build a house. In the case of the vineyard, it's going to be plant a vineyard, as opposed to a vineyard planted. And then 3, it's going to say who hasn't reaped it. The Gemara is going to do the exact same exercise as we did with the house. It's going to do with the vineyard. But from there, it's going to get into other laws regarding Arla, regarding Kilayim. So we're going to be introduced other laws related to how to create a kosher vineyard. It's not God willing coming tomorrow. A good day and a good chodesh. And again, we'll dedicate today's class to the refuah shlema of Chaya Hadas Bas Sina. You can have a good day and we'll hear good news.